Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning to everyone who are joining in today. It's my pleasure to be presenting today on behalf of Binsense. So we are Binsense, where we've developed the world's first contamination sensor that addresses the problem of contamination at curbside bins. So most of Australia world's recycling is not recycled due to contamination at source, and this often adds a lot of cost to councils to dispose. And unfortunately, because of the contamination, it ends up in the landfill. And the residents don't want this, even though everybody has the right intention to do the right thing with waste. Often they don't see the right outcome with what happens with their bin, and also if they don't do the right thing with their bins. And knowing countries like China, Indonesia, and India, who have all started to impose stricter restrictions and tighter control on what they can receive and how much contamination can be within the waste. So what are councils currently doing? So obviously they have two options. One is a manual inspection, which is what they call as a bin auditing. The high potential for error is because it's purely a surface scan and it's up to the skill of the person doing it. Some councils run it really effective. Some councils do a quick surface scan, and it's only done on collection day or certain specific days in a year. And it does increase the cost per bin because there is a labor cost, and then you only monitor the bin once or twice a year, and it's not a 24/7 monitoring. On the other end of the spectrum, where most of the councils, from our initial interviews and understanding, found that they couldn't do much because obviously due to the cost, and this increases the landfill cost. They have very high contamination rates, and that means those waste can't be exported or recycled or repurposed. So this is where we came in with our solution, which is an automated bin sensing technology that could look at signatures of contamination in your clean recyclables, but also what we found through our customer interviews and our initial prototypes is that our sensor can also identify compostable waste in your general rubbish bin, which often goes to the landfill. So we can identify compostable chemical waste in your clean recyclables, or we can also identify compostable waste that is normally thrown in the red bin that should be in the FOGO bin. And I understand not many councils have got the FOGO bin system, but it's an upcoming rollout that a lot of councils in Australia are trying to onboard. And our package comes, obviously the sensor is the component that measures the data, but then it comes up with a backend engine that does all the analytics. And our machine learning algorithm that we put into play with the sensor that reads the data, makes the data into an actionable result, and then it presents it to the council in a way that they can then take actions against it. So one of the things the councils can do is that they can see all the contaminated bins on the day of collection without even getting out of the truck. And that would mean that we can prevent the recycle truck from getting contaminated. And also the waste from the recycled from that bin now can be diverted to a general rubbish. At the same time, now we know which particular bin has been contaminated. We can then target the education towards those residents and help them with changing their waste behavior. So that's where our resident app comes into play, where it talks about what are they doing with their waste, how is their waste behavior, how often they're contaminating, and what sort of education material can be pushed towards them as and when we identify contamination, so we can do timely targeted education so we can help change their behavior. So our sensor, the whole system works, it's quite simple. We fully upload the sensor with all the algorithms. We preload it with the data, we install it on the bin, and then it starts looking for the signatures of contamination. As soon as a contamination is detected, there's a tablet on the truck that talks to the sensor, and then it downloads the data. And then once the tablet tells the truck driver that there is contamination, they can then take action against it, either by not collecting it or putting a sticker on the bin to say that the bin is contaminated and we're not going to collect it. And this way we are saving the truck from being contaminated, which then stops the contaminated waste going to the material recovery facilities and eventually causing any operational issues for the MRFs. And we all heard a lot of stories about contamination causing fire at different facilities. One of the reasons we've heard in WA is with Cleanaway, and also there's a few cases that we've heard in Sydney and in Victoria. So our early traction has been great. We've been heavily interviewing a lot of councils in the last 18 months, and we've interviewed more than 100 councils. And through that process, we've identified early adopters who have seen the light in this technology, and we're going to be running pilot projects with them to then put it to real test to understand how we can effectively address this contamination problem with curbside bins. So we have one Victorian council and we have five WA councils that are currently committed to doing a trial. And we're also in discussion with 10 other councils that are keen to get on board with us with our technology. And then we're looking at many ways to grow this technology. So we don't want this to be just a contamination sensor. We want it to be a bit more than that. So as I said before, we can target education materials to households who are contaminating. So that's going to be fully automated with our technology. So councils don't have to worry about doing timely educations. And the analytics that comes from the data can then be used in understanding our bin size is correct. Is our frequency of collection adequate? Are we collecting it too frequently? Are we collecting it too less? We can give a lot of analytics through the data that we collect. But more importantly, where we are focusing is keeping the education free for the residents. In that way, they can easily onboard this technology, and it's more of a carrot approach. So we're not going to find them. We're not going to tell them with a stick approach that they're doing something wrong. We're going to rather educate them and say, okay, we found this problem in your bin. Make sure that you've addressed the problem, or here are the education material. Make sure you know which waste goes in which bin. And if you don't know, we will have a Q&A thing within our app that can then help you understand how you can better segregate your waste. And in the long run, we have plans for residents to then have gamification where they can then see how each one is doing better with their waste, and then look at how different councils are doing with different waste streams. So our current roadmap, as I said, is we have approached more than 100 councils. We're currently in what we call the pilot trial, where we have a 50 to 100 sensor trial projects that we're going to be running with 6 councils that is currently committed, with 10 other coming up soon. And then by end of 2020, we want to be deploying it across at least more than 10 councils, launch into UK. We've been talking to a lot of councils in UK and US, where there's been a lot of interest in this technology, purely because they pay 10 times more for contamination, and it's a growing problem for them. And then by early next year and the later part of the year, we're going to be launching into US and Europe, and then looking into venturing into the other markets like Asia, China. So that's Binsense. So our sensor is primarily developed to monitor contamination, report on the contamination, and then use the data to then educate the households, councils, and the truck drivers on what's going on with the contamination. Thanks for your time, and I'm happy to take questions. So one of the questions we get frequently asked is in terms of the data privacy and whether how a sensor protects the data. So what we often one of the challenges we've seen in the past is there's been camera that's been used in addressing contamination, and our sensor doesn't have any camera. Rather, we sense what we call it as signatures of contamination. So there's no imaging. So we don't track people's buying behavior. We don't track people's product. All we track is the signatures of contamination. And then our sensor is designed with the machine learning algorithm that we've developed in the back end to look for those signatures. And then using the signature, we then develop an education material. Okay, so I've got a question from Mel. What advice would you give to another startup wanting to make a difference in the environmental space? Well, I think with the environmental startups, I think the key thing is that make sure you're addressing a customer problem. There's a lot of environmental problems, but you need to make sure that there is a growing customer problem and there is a customer need. And once you have identified that, the next thing I would say is just go ahead and do it. With our contamination sensing, we did the same thing. We've been talking to a lot of councils, and the recurring pattern that came out of the interviews was that contamination was a key growing problem. And we just said, okay, what if we address 70% of the contamination problem with our current technology that is readily available that we can put together with a sensor? And that's what we did. So all I would say is make sure you're addressing a customer problem and then go ahead with it. Thanks, Patty, for your comments. And Charlie, are there many other competitors or tech doing similar things? Is your device protected? Okay, so to date, we haven't seen any other technology similar to ours in the waste space. So we are quite unique, and to that uniqueness, we have protected our technology with a patent, both locally and internationally. And also, in terms of how this technology works, just to give a bit of a background, there's a lot of transmission technologies that you can get nowadays, which is your 4G, your LoRa, uh, and then you have other low-range radio frequency technologies. We have adopted to go with low-range radio frequency and keeping the transmission on the truck. So we don't need to invest in heavy infrastructure. We don't need to invest in massive cell towers that's going to cost councils hundreds and thousands of dollars. Our technology or the receiver sits in the truck, and then the sensor is in the bin. And then, as we know, the trucks often drive at least once in a week. And as far as it's within the vicinity of the sensor, it'll download the data, and then it'll analyze the data, and then our dashboard will then present it in a more actionable form. Thanks, Paul, for your comments. And what we are hoping to do is to have a lot of Australian councils to onboard our technology, especially over the East Coast. Obviously, Victoria has been the first of the ranks to start to onboard our technology, and then being a WA grown business, we also have 5 other councils here that have agreed to go ahead with our technology and see the benefits. And we're going to be applying it across multiple applications, such as clean recyclables in your, as I said, in the red bins where it often goes to landfill. The statistics say that at least 50% of the contents of the red bins are compostable waste that could be reused or repurposed, and our technology will help monitor and report on those so we can divert or segregate the waste in the right bins. And councils that don't have FOGO bins can use our technology to monitor the level of compostable waste in their general rubbish, and then put in the system and the back-end support in place to say that our sensor is now proven that there is enough data for compostable waste in the bin. Again, our ultimate aim is to make sure that we are diverting as much waste away from the landfill, but also importantly changing people's behavior, and we can do it only by holding their hands and educating them, and then providing timely information on waste. Thanks, Adrian, for your comments. So I see we got 5 minutes left, and feel free to ask any questions, whether it's waste related or whether it's startup related. Feel free to shoot any questions, and I'm happy to answer. And also, one thing we found that our sensor technology can actually be used across is in other areas, such as monitoring any contamination within restaurant grease traps. It's one other application that we recently explored that's different to our initial application, which is household waste. We understand grease trap is that could be converted into usable biodiesel or bio oil, and what we've identified is that if grease traps end up with a lot of contamination in them, then you can't really convert it into biodiesel, and it has to go into a compostable waste. And our sensor has got a niche application there, which was a new area that we explored. Was there, thanks, Mel, for your question. Were there any unexpected challenges you faced? Well, the biggest challenge we face is in terms of getting councils and households to understand the benefit of this technology, because often when you have anything that is tracked 24/7, there's a fear that you're being monitored and you're going to be fined. And that's why I kept saying that we are not focusing on finding people, we are focusing on educating people, and we are trying to use this data to benefit the general community and helping change the waste behavior. So that has been the primary challenge, and that's been the most question asked by the council, saying, okay, how do we get over the hurdle of residents asking this question, how is our data protected? Thanks, Maxine, for your question. What would be one tip you would give for someone looking to get started with turning their idea into a startup? So the first thing, if you want to turn an idea into a startup, is to first look out for is that a problem? If go and you have to just go out and talk in the market and identify if there is a growing problem, and for that you need to talk to your customers. Once you've established that and got the insights, the next thing is you've got all the validation to go ahead and say, okay, now I can grow this idea into a business. So don't ever jump into starting a business without validating with your customers. It's very important to know that it's a problem that you have to address. Thanks, Adrian, for your question. Can you share a little more about the patenting process? At which point in time of the startup? Okay, so patenting is very critical. So with patent, you can't disclose too much to the public, because then once it becomes a public data, then you pretty much lost the opportunity to patent anything, and people can claim that anybody has come up with the idea. So we had to play low key for a long time. So even though we started in 2018, we had to keep it quiet for at least 7 to 8 months until the patent application has gone through, and then talk to councils. But in the process, we've been talking to councils about the idea. We didn't talk about the technology and how it works. We talked to them about, okay, what are we trying to develop? How are we going to solve it? And then a surface level information. So that's what we've been talking to a lot of councils. But even that generated a lot of interest. So my advice for patenting would be that if it's something that is unique and you think nobody's done it, just go ahead and patent it. Don't wait for once you're validated with your customer, then go ahead and do it. So otherwise, you'll be spending a lot of money on patenting. Have council? Thanks, Charlie, for the question. Have councils been telling you that contamination and recycling is a big problem for them, or is a peripheral problem? How big, if so? Okay, so it sort of varies between councils, but majority of the councils that we've spoken to have said contamination is a key problem, and it has also come from the material recovery facilities, because they receive contaminated waste, and that itself imposes challenge for them in relation to operational efficiencies, etc. And it's even more predominant for overseas countries like UK, where they have said, they're seeing this as a 10 times problem because the cost is tenfold for them. And the data that they collect, even with the manual process, has clearly indicated that contamination is a growing problem. And recent discussion with South Australian councils has also indicated to us that contamination is a growing problem. How to effectively address it is still a key thing for them. And technologies like ours will be a step forward in helping address those problems. Can you mention? Thanks, Matt, for your question. Can you invention detect those industrial compostable cups which should not go to yellow? Yes, definitely it can. Anything that can emit a gas, our technology can detect. So where do we find more about Binsense? You can go to our website, binsense.com.au, or you can get in touch with me and I can put my details on the chat channel.